So I'm going to be reacting to this video of Faraz Zahabi, who is the head coach of Tristar Gym, head coach for George St. Pierre during his whole career. Great, very knowledgeable on all aspects of fighting. When it comes to fighting, Faraz Zahabi is probably the best person you could actually listen to on what mixed martial arts is, how to train in mixed martial arts, and also how to train in all the different aspects of mixed martial arts: jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, boxing, Muay Thai, wrestling. And he talks about conditioning and what actual, what jiu-jitsu guys are missing with the way that they train. And this is something that, I witnessed when I was, back in the day when I was at jiu-jitsu gyms. People just roll and have fun, and they never condition after practice. As a wrestler growing up, that's all we did was we'd wrestle, and then at the end, it's all conditioning. You're doing sprints, you're doing suicides, you're doing, rounds of squats, you're doing rounds of push-ups, you all kinds of conditioning. So we'll get into the video and let him talk about it.
Plethora of exercises to do after practice. You do jiu-jitsu practice, then you finish with conditioning. You do your boxing practice, then you finish your conditioning. Look at Mayweather. He goes in the gym, he spars, he hits the bag, does his mitts, then he does his conditioning. Martial arts practice finishes with conditioning. Go to Dan Gable. When Dan Gable was a coach, his guys would do technique, they would wrestle, then conditioning. Class doesn't end with just rolling. That's
Dan Gable, one of the greatest American wrestlers of all time, wrestled for the University of Iowa State back in the 70s. I think it was the 70s, and was the head coach of the Iowa Hawkeyes, University of Iowa, for a long time. Most winningest coach, I think, of all time. Won so many national championships, and he pretty much created the standard for collegiate wrestling when it comes to performance, practice, mindset, pretty much everything. It's Iowa style means something in the world of wrestling because of him.
That's the major difference in jiu-jitsu culture. It's a cultural thing. It's not a technical thing. Nobody's more advanced on the ground than the jiu-jitsu guys. The jiu-jitsu guys are most sophisticated, okay? But conditioning, they're not the best. Now, there's a lot of steroids in jiu-jitsu, so a lot of guys, they skip that part. They skip the head of the line, and they're number one in the world. Yeah, they're so good. But in the wrestling world, there's a lot of guys without PEDs, and they got there doing conditioning. After practice,
Exactly.
they do conditioning. They do neck bridging. They do lunges. They run. They roll. They do rope climb. The workout doesn't end until you've done your conditioning. I think it's a major issue with jiu-jitsu. Like in my gym, after practice, I make the guys do conditioning. I make them do kettlebell, pull-ups, bench, run, airdyne. I tell them, guys, don't leave the mat without doing conditioning. You have to do. I do my conditioning just to make sure that, like I'm showing a good example. Also, I really think it's important. If you don't do conditioning, guys, you're gonna get injured. Oh, jiu-jitsu guys always tell me, oh, my knee, my elbow. Yeah, but it's normal because if you don't do conditioning, guys, why do you think wrestlers do conditioning? It improves performance, but also it helps your body withstand the stress of the training. You increase your work capacity. So, like when you're doing, let's say, for instance, you're doing, I don't know, let's say you're doing lunges with dumbbells, okay? Your legs are getting more stress than they are when you're wrestling or doing jiu-jitsu. So once they adapt to the stress of dumbbells, the stress of wrestling and running and doing jiu-jitsu is not so bad, okay? That's what we call work capacity. Your work capacity is greater. Why? Because you're doing jiu-jitsu practice, then you're doing your workout. So what happens? Your body's saying, hey, look, I have to adapt to all this work. So when I just do jiu-jitsu, that's half the work I'm going to do today. That's just a minimal amount of what my body can do. Okay, we're trying to increase our work capacity, our ability to work. That's why in the Strong and Stable program, I'm always trying to tell you guys, encourage you guys, do your conditioning after practice, not before. Why not before? Your muscles are temporarily weaker after you work out, obviously. So if you go and grapple after, Grappling is live. It's not a stable movement. So I'm twisting and turning, and my stabilizers, my muscles responsible for stabilizing my joints, are a little bit more fatigued. Why? Well, maybe I just finished a run or something. So less muscular strength, less protection for the joints, okay? Now we do our grappling first, our boxing first, our wrestling first, our kickboxing first, and then we do conditioning. Why? Because when we do conditioning, everything is perfectly straight. If I'm doing a box squat or if I'm doing plyometrics, everything is perfectly straight. That's why I tell you guys, don't go knees over toes. You get plenty of that when you're doing combat training. Guys, it's an absurdity to me. Like, let me explain something really important here. Really, really important. When I trained at the wrestling club, okay, the Olympic Wrestling Club, the warm-up before wrestling, sometimes for fun, would be playing basketball. Now, these guys are Russian wrestlers. I got to train with a lot of good Russian wrestlers in Canada, okay? They immigrated to Canada. They're the best wrestlers in Canada, and I got to train with them for many years, okay? These guys don't play basketball like, they don't play, it's like a street basketball, right? There's traveling, there's shoving, there's pushing. It's almost like a street fight. But they're warming up. This is their warm-up. This is how they warm up. Like, I've seen videos of Satya playing basketball before practice, and they play actually sometimes with a medicine ball because it's heavy. These guys are not basketball players, but they play basketball. Why? It's fun. We warm up with basketball. Sometimes we warm up with soccer. This is very traditional, by the way. A lot of wrestling clubs do this. Why? Basketball is very mild. Basketball is a 5 on 10 in terms of strength, stability, calories per second. It's a lot less intense than wrestling. That's why I'm telling you, like, I would never hurt my knee. I could play basketball every day for 8 hours, and I'm not a good basketball player, but I will never hurt my knee playing basketball. Why? The stress of wrestling is so much greater than...
I don't know. I know a lot of people who've injured themselves with basketball, but I get his point. The stress level in basketball is way lower than wrestling, so it's a good vehicle to warm your body up. I get it.
Basketball, it's so much greater. Now, basketball athletes are phenomenal athletes. They can run, they can jump, they're explosive, they're quick, they have great cardio, their endurance is great. What I'm talking about is their joints. Their joints meet a lot less stress than in wrestling. In wrestling, it's ferocious. Basketball is a 5 on 10. Wrestling is in 7 or 8 on 10. That's why your conditioning program has to be a 9 on 10. You need a margin of safety between your sport and your conditioning. Your conditioning has to be more intense, but it has to be done perfectly well aligned. No stress on my joints. The stress has to go on my muscles. If the stress is on my muscles and not my joints, my muscles get stronger. If my muscles get stronger, they protect the joints, okay? As soon as your muscles are tired, weak, or fatigued, the stress goes on your joints, you hurt your joints, okay? Now, there's more to protecting your joints, but guys, the real secret to wrestling, it's not the technique, it's the conditioning. The other fatal flaw of jiu-jitsu, a huge mistake, is
that's a huge statement. I think what he means there, and I don't want to make up something that he's not talking about, but this is a true thing about wrestling, is out of every sport I've ever dabbled into, jiu-jitsu, boxing, kickboxing, I grew up wrestling. The conditioning for wrestling is far more superior than any other sport. And that is because of the culture. Like he said, the culture is you push yourself in conditioning so that the wrestling is easier, because the wrestling is so intense. Right? When you're in the third period of a wrestling match, and compared to like the last few minutes of a jiu-jitsu match, the reason why you have to be conditioned so much is because in jiu-jitsu you can lay flat of your back and not have any concern, because being flat of your back is okay, right? In wrestling, being flat of your back ends the match. It's over for you. You have been pinned. The amount of energy and effort it takes to not go flat of your back when another man is wrestling you is why wrestling is so much harder. People don't realize this. It's very simple. Flat of your back. The whole point of a wrestling match is to pin someone flat of their back. That shows complete control and domination. In jiu-jitsu, jiu-jitsu starts after you get pinned. Okay? Jiu-jitsu is literally saying, I am going to allow you to pin me and hold me here, but we're going to keep going for a submission hold. That's it. In jiu-jitsu, if you have pulled guard and you are on your back, you have lost a wrestling match. That's why it's like, it's so much harder than jiu-jitsu because of the objective. That's like when you saw Gordon Ryan do a wrestling match with, what's his face? I forgot his name. You can just look it up. Gordon Ryan wrestling match. He got destroyed because he couldn't just pull guard and lay on his back. He could not withstand the pressure that the wrestler was giving him in the confines of a wrestling match. He was screwed. It was over in like, I don't know, a minute and a half, maybe less. So anyways, let's get back to for us.
They took out takedowns. In TriStar, my gym, there's wrestling every single day, every single practice. Jiu-jitsu practice and wrestling practice are one. If you go to a wrestling club, they wrestle on the ground and then they wrestle standing. TriStar Gym, we start on the ground, we warm up on the ground, then we wrestle standing. Now, not everybody wrestles. We have a room for guys who want to wrestle and guys who want to stay free rolling on the ground. That's fine. You don't have to wrestle, but I highly recommend it to my students. I tell them, guys, for self-defense, if you're doing jiu-jitsu for fun, learn wrestling as well. Warm up on the ground and wrestle. If you're well warmed up, wrestling is very safe. Why? Because one day you might be in a self-defense situation. I know jiu-jitsu is fun, guys, rolling around on the ground, but what's the point of doing a martial art for 20 years and then one day you get into a fight in the street and the guy kicks your ass? Why? You didn't learn to wrestle. What are you going to do? What are you going to do if you're fighting with him? You're going to grab on his shirt and pull guard? Like, I've had black belts tell me they don't know what to do if they get into a street fight.
Hold on, what? That's what's crazy about jiu-jitsu is people love it so much and it's so much fun. They lie to themselves and say that that actually is going to help them in a street fight. They don't know what to do. These black belts, I've come into gyms and roll with black belts where I immediately pin them to the ground. No way they're sweeping me. No way they're getting up. Now, my ability to submit them is subpar. My submission game's not the best, but my control game is so much higher than theirs. That if it were a street fight, it would be so much easier for me to end that street fight with ground and pound from the top. But yeah, I mean, like you said, the problem with jiu-jitsu now is you don't have legitimate fights in the jiu-jitsu gym. Jiu-jitsu gyms should be incorporating like legitimate fights with punches as part of training. You have smaller gloves on, you have some type of a headgear on, and you do rounds where someone on top of you can throw punches. Now, obviously, it's controlled, but that will make you way more aware of the lack that you have in your all-around game when it comes to real self-defense in a fight situation.
And I find that absurd. You've been training 10 years. How could you not know? You're a martial arts expert. You're a black belt.
Difference. There is a difference, and he knows this. There is a difference between a black belt in jiu-jitsu and a martial arts expert. Martial arts is all-encompassing when it comes to combat. It's fight-oriented. Martial arts is fight-oriented. It's not grappling or it's not jiu-jitsu oriented. It's everything oriented. A jiu-jitsu black belt thinks that just by knowing jiu-jitsu and being proficient in it, it makes them a martial arts expert, and it doesn't.
Guys, personally, I would never give somebody a black belt if they don't wrestle. Personally, I would never give you a black belt. You have to know takedowns and you have to know your ground. I find it absurd. That gentleman over there is a black belt, and if he were to engage you in combat, he's going to sit down. I find it absurd. Now, I have nothing against guard pulling when it's done in the correct way, in a smart, intelligent way, as a surprise. But if that is the basis of your game, I find that absurd.
Yep.
It's absurd. You're a master of martial arts, but you can't defend yourself on the street. That's absurd. There's no reason why you shouldn't learn the wrestling. There's no reason. There's
I'll give you the reason for us. It's harder. It's way harder. That's it.
Absolutely no reason. Now, is Oliveira a good wrestler? He's good. He's okay. He's good. He hasn't been doing it since day one. That's for sure. Like especially you look at earlier in his career.
Yeah. So that's pretty much the gist of what he's saying. Yeah. I mean, and it's one of those things. Like I talk to jiu-jitsu guys, people who do jiu-jitsu now, and because I don't roll anymore, I don't talk to as many. But when I come in contact with some, the ones who actually understand the dominance of wrestling compared to jiu-jitsu, when I mention my background in wrestling, they're like, "Oh, okay, wow." Like that's some legit stuff, because it's way harder. When you're rolling with someone, it's way harder to roll with a Division I wrestler than it is a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Simply because of the wrestling background and what it provides the wrestler when it comes to control, like physically controlling someone. Like, having a black belt jiu-jitsu on top of you, like with them in your guard, it's not that hard to control them. But when it comes to a wrestler, like a wrestler who's green, is not really even, doesn't really know much jiu-jitsu, you put him in your guard, it's going to be hard. That the type of top pressure and top control that a wrestler has is ridiculous. So it's good to have conversations where people actually know the importance of wrestling. But a lot of jiu-jitsu guys, and this is in every walk of life. When you do something, a lot of people will convince themselves that this is all I need to win in a fight. Then you have more people around you saying that, and you're like, yeah, jiu-jitsu is amazing because we would win street fights. And it's like, okay. It's like people who do kung fu, who think that they could win street fights, just win every street fight with kung fu, even though they've never been in a fight. They've never trained people trained with people with a boxing background, Muay Thai background, kickboxing background, wrestling background, jiu-jitsu background. But that world kind of creates a culture of we're dominant. We're the dominant art here. And, it's called getting brainwashed, but, it's easily shown that they're wrong. You just fight them. So that's why a lot of people have forgotten how mixed martial arts has developed over the past 30 years. It started off with people saying that, and then having to get checked. Gym wars, gym fights where where people would go, like a boxer would go to a jiu-jitsu place and then get tapped, you know. So anyways, people forget about that. And a lot of jiu-jitsu guys don't fight. You know, they don't even spar. You know, there's no full contact MMA sparring. So they'll never know. So I feel like that's another thing that they definitely should be doing more is dabbling their feet into mixed martial arts training. You know, because it's like try to spar somebody who's just trying to punch you. You know, try to submit somebody who can punch you. You never do that in a jiu-jitsu class. So how do you know if this is really going to help you? You don't. Answer is you don't. But, you know, everybody's got their own thing that they love to convince themselves of. So anyways, Firas Zahabi, the man, awesome video, but wrestling's the key. Wrestling's the key to really understanding combat. Just overall, it I don't care if you can box. If you can box and you don't know how to wrestle, you don't understand combat. If you can just submit people and you don't know how to wrestle, you don't know combat. If you can box and you can submit people off your back, you still don't know combat, because the moment a high-level wrestler comes at you, then what? That's the key to really understanding what a street fight is and what combat actually is. That's just an inevitable thing that you will have to come get up against and have to figure out. And it's the hardest thing to figure out. If you've got striking, if you've got jiu-jitsu, you know, like we you know, there's so many cases of that in the UFC and mixed martial arts and Pride, where, you know, a fighter with great striking, some jiu-jitsu, just gets dominated by the wrestler. You know, and you know what? Our memories suck about that. We forget that real quickly, because people who don't like wrestling because it's hard don't like to admit that it's more dominant. A high-level wrestler is going to have a higher likelihood of winning the fight based on that. Because if you accept that as a striker, then you've got to learn it. And strikers do not like wrestling. It's not as athletic. It's a grind, and it's slowed down, and it's just two rams just butting heads, you know. And a striker likes to be athletic on his feet, finesse. He likes to be very technical and moving. The wrestling clinches and positions lock you down, so it's not fun for him, and I understand that, but it is inevitable. And if you deny it, you finally get into a fight with a wrestler. Well, you know, you will have wished that you did take the time to learn. Cool.